792. Southeastern Ultima Segmentum. Exodite World Charnak, the Eldari of Charnak. The giant had worked throughout the night, not once stopping to rest save to quickly consume the meal of dew bread and water provided for him. Each time she entered the room to bring more writing utensils, the stack of papers grew more and more, and before her eyes she could see line after line recorded in small but steady script. It was not particularly elegant script, but his work was rapid and readable enough. The scant details she could read from his writing detailed a wall of numbers and proper names, many of which she had no context for. Many of the notes seemed to be precise timetables and schedules, compositions of potential forces and surveys of suspected locations of interest. A vast wealth of information that might fill a dozen ledgers, being recorded as fast as the giant could move his stylus across the sheets of parchment. Occasionally the stylus had to be refilled with ink, which she was also instructed to bring in regular quantities. Each time she did, making sure to remove the now empty inkwells as she left. The giant worked at an acceptable pace. When she had been asked to ensure he was ready for the gathering of lords, he briefly paused before turning to smile and nod. With all the correct promptness, he had been brought to the hot springs at the base of the world tree and washed by a small cohort of maids. She had to scold them for their giggles already, and she would likely have to again. It was improper to speak of a guest in such a manner. The giant was massive in all proportions, taller than the tallest of the Eldari, bound in muscles enough to match common dragons, and covered over in scars of such grievous injury she could scarcely imagine. She was quite confident that he had been cleaved from shoulder to heart at one point. His jaw was broad, his brow straight, his eyes deeply set. He looked as an Eldari pigment mixed with a mere drop of Krork, a strangely accentuating combination. The giant's features were acceptable enough. Now she stood behind him as he spoke with the gathered clan lords of Charnak over topics of conquest and coming dangers, over topics of accumulation of power, over safeguarding centers of civilization and manufacturing, over potential allies and enemies that dwelled in the stars above. Frequently, he asked questions of common strategies and manpower, and listened intently to the explanations given. The giant spoke competently, although not poetically or cleverly. His words were blunt and direct, and he made frequent mistakes in pronunciation or context. This was an immense improvement from the day before, in which his language was crude and basic. They were always functional in a straightforward manner, much as a child's were. The only exceptions were some of his few proper names, often for dreadful or horrible entities, and almost always contained a masterful number of layered insults in their exact wordings. The giant almost never made the same mistake twice in speaking, and his constant practice demonstrated improvement each and every conversation. It was slow enough to not notice until one looked back at the previous hour. But once she had realized it, it was impossible to ignore. The giant would speak at an acceptable level within a cycle. She made the mistake of letting her gaze drift across the giant's sword and shield again. A warm echo of pain drifted through her bones. Quickly, she looked away, carefully concealing her shudder behind a professional mask. She did not know how he could bear to look upon them, let alone touch. No matter how powerful the artifacts were, surely one would wield weapons less tortured than those? She was not a master of the immaterial arts. Her role was as a servant to royalty, and a servant she would remain until ordered otherwise. She was not educated in the sorcerer's arts enough to know the precise nature of those golden relics. All she knew was that she could not bear to look upon them any longer than a moment. The giant moved, starting to walk over to speak with another clan lord. She followed in his wake, dutifully carrying the papers he had requested her to bring. She glanced over as she did, catching the eye of the Stormcloak stationed on the right side of the grand hall. He was handsome, and his gaze was strong. His eyes were bright looking upon her form. The Dragon Lord had called the banners of Sharnak. Soon the men, widows, and infertile would be marching to war. She would have to find one to sire a child with in the coming year, to preemptively replace those that would fall in battle and thus keep their population stable. Hopefully her chosen mate would return from the wars to come, and her child would have a father. That warrior was acceptable. She would ask about him later on, when not performing her duties. Her gaze turned back to the giant, who did not pause in his steady but long steps. She was forced to speed her own pace to keep within an acceptable distance. It was slightly more straining than she was used to. Her feet were starting to cramp. The giant was much too tall. It was quite unacceptable. One warrior was not enough to defeat the man-prince. Stormcloak Arshal had tried his blade against him, using all the standard tactics of greenskin battle, and was soundly defeated before he could realize his error. The man-prince was as large as a greenskin war boss, yes, but he had a higher degree of cunning. Arshal had been lured into overextending himself on the sixth blow, and at once was sent to the ground with the training blade at his throat. 3 warriors had not been enough to defeat the man-prince. They had realized his degree of higher cunning after the first bout, and had attempted to be more cautious with their movements and blows. Those 3 had been soundly defeated after the 20th blow. The man-prince was as large as a greenskin war boss, far more intelligent and deliberate, and with this bout, they realized he was swifter than one as well. Not quite as swift as the greatest champions among the Eldari, but far swifter than they had been expecting. Those 3 had been baited into a simultaneous moment of recovery and had been punished accordingly. All 3 were thrown to the ground. Five warriors had not been enough to defeat the man-prince. Their tactics had changed, treating him as if he were an overtall Eldari veteran. They attempted to harry and harass the man-prince into overextending himself, and then punish accordingly in the barest moments. They acted exactly as they should, moving in trained unison and ready to exploit the openings created by their allies. The 5 had been defeated, not as great of an extent as the previous bouts, but defeated all the same. The man-prince was not as strong as a greenskin war boss as it turned out. He was much stronger. Where cunning and swiftness failed to provide the openings the man-prince required, he relied on explosive strength. Strength enough to clash with the stable defenses of the Stormcloak's training swords and still toss them through the air many feet away. It was like dueling a Wraith Lord, packed into the frame of a Wraith Guard. He had tried blocking the man-prince once. His back was still sore from where he smashed against the wall of the interior training halls. The man-prince required a new training blade afterwards, having shattered his against the weapons of the second-to-last Stormcloak in that bout. Now they were attempting to overcome the man-prince with 10 warriors. 10 Stormcloaks, guardians of their Dragon Lord, a full 2 talons of some of the best warriors of Charnak. Granted, they were not using their psychic might as they normally might. That's not what the point of this particular set of exercises was, but the outcome was still quite absurd. The man-prince had claimed that his people would conquer the wheel within 200 of his people's cycles. The man-prince had claimed, with warriors such as he, that was not quite as laughable as what one might first think. The 10 Stormcloaks wove around the warrior as a pack of raptors around a carnosaur. He was too well defended to rush in, too fast to safely engage against except for the safest of strikes, and too mighty to allow even a glancing blow. Their remaining conventional stratagem was exhaustion, wearing down with safe blows, gently sapping the strength of the defender until it was easier to attack. He swallowed and ignored the first bead of sweat on his brow, weaving with a fellow Stormcloak in an attempt to distract the man-prince long enough for a safe blow from an opposite soldier to get through his defenses. This bout had started an hour ago. A Stormcloak attempted a distracting blow from behind. The man-prince retaliated with an immediate and decisive clash, throwing the warrior away. Taking advantage of the crack in his defenses, 3 more Stormcloaks attempted a stab at the man-prince's midsection. The man-prince seemed to anticipate this, throwing himself forwards along with his first blow to avoid their blades. 2 more Stormcloaks had already moved into place where he had tossed himself forwards. They were forced to abort their attacks to dodge out of the way of yet another swing, mighty enough to create gusts of wind. The man-prince seemed to anticipate even that, because his swing continued in its arc. They realized their mistake. A Stormcloak that had been moving into place on the side hastily raised his blade to block. The swing sent the Stormcloak tumbling through the air, flipping around like a brick tossed down a mountainside. A resonant crack filled the air. The man-prince was forced to move yet again, dodging out of the way of another set of synchronous blows. Then another set of synchronized blows. Then another. On the next set of blows, a Stormcloak's footing slipped. He barely had time to righten his guard before the man-prince's practice blade slammed into his shoulder. He was forced to kneel, the rock beneath his right knee cracking audibly. They were lucky that they were wearing armor for this practice. Otherwise, that might have required surgery to heal. He fell all the same, barely able to stand afterwards, the first proper casualty of this bout. It would be impossible to defeat the man-prince without casualties then. Something of a shame on their part. They had hundreds of campaigns under their belts at this point. All remaining Stormcloaks rushed the man-prince. The man-prince moved to make space for himself even as they leapt after. The blade of the man-prince flashed. 3 Stormcloaks were sent tumbling through the air. His open palm raced forward, snatching one Stormcloak by the arm and using him as a shield against the blades of 2 more Stormcloaks. The last 3 Stormcloaks had their blades tap against his vital areas, neck, armpit, and behind the knee. At once, all combat ceased. The man-prince dropped the Stormcloak he had been holding up gently, allowing him to right himself. He sighed mightily as he did so, shaking his head in minor defeat. "You are truly exceptional warriors. I suppose this is my loss then." The blackguard didn't even sound tired. The Stormcloaks picked up their battered bodies and stared at the man-prince for a moment. Their gazes turned to one another, then back to the man-prince. He seemed to pick up on that, reaching up to grab at his shoulder and roll it with a loosening crack. His face was carefully blank. He himself tried his best to not show his exhaustion through his armor. His blade had only barely tapped the man-prince's neck, the training blade a mere hand's length away from his face. The Dragon Lord called out from the side, "You more than proved yourself, son of man. I can't imagine any single warrior of Charnock overcoming you when properly armed. Perhaps a Wraith Lord, but certainly nothing less." Their king was an expert at hiding his astonishment behind a porcelain mask, showing as little as possible to the outside world. The man-prince shook his head. "That will not be enough. I can only be in one place at a time. We'll be restricted to a single front until the first army is raised." The Dragon Lord waved a hand. "We have managed before now. We can manage long enough for you to get a force familiar to you. Come, follow me if you would. The smith I have in mind needs to get a look at you and your arms." Their king turned his gaze to them and nodded. "Stormcloaks, get your injuries treated and rest for the remainder of the day." They snapped into a salute as their king walked away, the man-prince following in his wake. They walked over to retrieve the man-prince's golden sword and shield, those fearsome things burning with pain, and then out of the training hall entirely. The Stormcloaks fell out of their salutes, shoulders and bodies slumping with exhaustion. Kaine's wretched arm right there. Arshel muttered out a curse next to him, something that was met with grunts of agreement from the rest of them. He raised his sword and looked at it, having been used to defend against the blows of the man-prince on at least one occasion. It was cracked all the way through, about to shatter, which explained why his arms were so sore. He dipped the hammer into the channel of water, wetting and cooling the metal once more. The hammer was withdrawn, 2 half-twists were made, then brought down on the glowing metal before him. Sparks flew, a beautiful sight. He hammered the metal into a twisting coil as his lips muttered out the next stanza of the forge song. A weapon of the greenskins was simply taken from whatever they had on hand and brandished as it was. There was no story woven into the blade, only layered upon it. A weapon of a lesser race was forged from raw metal and brandished once complete. Its song started the same as any other of their weapons, and its story would be developed as it was wielded. But the initial song was a weak thing, easy to memorize, easy to break. A weapon of the eldar was forged from raw metal, with its story deliberated upon and settled deeply into the core of its spirit. They were forged with purpose and story. Their songs echoed in his ears, a resonant harmony. This blade was to be a guardsman's blade. The metal had been taken from a mining town in the southern continent, known for its frequent earthquakes. This blade would rumble with an echo of those titanic quakes, and it would shake the blades out of the grip of its wielder's foes. The first lesson an apprentice learned was that this was not some ability bestowed upon the blade. It was the story of the blade, started long before it was forged and carried into the future. It would occasionally strike just true enough to rumble the weapons out of the hands of its foes and out of the hands of its wielder, because it was going to. It was in its nature, and its fate was quietly settled into the blade. Or perhaps it wasn't a fate. Perhaps it was simply its part in the song. That was a question he had not quite figured out yet. There was a call behind him. He ignored it for now. The blade was not quite done. He continued his work, muttering out the song of the blade as he did so. Once the metal had cooled, it was put back into the forge to heat again, and finally he turned his attention to who called out for him. It was Neil's boy. He sniffed mightily and stood up on old bones to bow properly. Dragon Lord Nil. Ray, what can old Gamil do for you? His voice was scratchy from disuse. It was fine. He had no one he needed to impress in these halls. He had long gotten much too old for it. I have a task for you, Forger Singer. A new ally needs appropriate armor. You are best for this task. The boy declared as imposingly as he could manage. He felt a small smile tug at his lips at the sight. I can do that, Dragon Lord, he answered. You have him here. I'll need a measure of him. The boy nodded and leaned out the doorway into his chamber to call out. Robot Guilliman, if you would enter? Robot Guilliman was not an Eldari name. It was a strong name, though. He could taste the song of a monarch on that name. A large figure ducked his head under the doorway into his forge and began to follow the boy down the stairs. Taller than any kind he had seen before, and carrying. He breathed in when he saw the relics the crowned monarch carried. He tasted the song of those things. He saw the visions of its story. A vessel of blood in his nose cracked open and trailed thinly down his face and onto his lip. He set an arm on his anvil, forcing his gaze away from them and giving himself a moment to steady himself. He breathed in deeply, carefully, not tasting their song again. You don't forget the taste of divinity, however. Forger Singer, the voice of Nil's boy called out to him, and he forced himself to focus on the muted world, shunting the immaterial from his senses for a moment and blinding himself. He blinked and rolled his eyes around, finding the two standing before him with slight concern. He pushed himself up and dusted off his apron. So this is the other boy you need armor for, Dragon Lord. I suppose. He trailed off as he stared at the not Eldari's clothes, seeing familiar but sloppy work. He frowned and stepped forwards, taking hold of the fabric and getting closer to it. This isn't my daughter's work, is it? She hadn't gotten lazy while not visiting me, has she? I'll whip her legs if she has. The boy's face smoothed out its concern as he gave a small smile. Your granddaughter's, actually. He paused to consider that. He looked closer at the fabric, then asked a question. Granddaughter? How old is she? Nearing her 2nd century, Gamil. 2nd century, eh? He supposed it was about right for someone that young then. He would have to go give her a talking to, regardless. This stitching was uneven around the edges. He grunted and let go of the clothing, looking up at the crowned monarch. After a moment, he raised a wrinkled brow. Gia's tits. What did they feed you, boy? You're a big one. The crowned monarch blinked before giving a small smile. Tubers, grains, and meat, for the most part. Camille nodded. That would certainly do it. Make sure you keep eating good, then. No need to go all thin like those Kamaras. Got it. Now, what kind of armor will you need, then? I suppose the best you can forge. Don't worry about weight. I can handle it well enough. The crowned monarch answered. He shook his head. Not that part, boy. I already knew that. He gave a wave of his hand. The crowned monarch wears heavy plates. It was obvious. Okay, it wasn't worth explaining all the little details. Striding over to a large table and gently moving finished weapons off of it, he spoke again. Here, those arms of yours. Place them on the table here. Let me get a proper look at them. The crowned monarch was confused, but relented, moving over to the table and placing the relics on the table. Camille mounted his hands on the table, careful to not touch their golden bones, and slowly opened his senses once more. Unbound Visions, 795, M30. Northeastern Ultima Segmentum, Nostramo, Hungry Vermin. This was a bad place, an unsafe place. She had gotten them, all free of the scampering, starved dogs, wild, bedraggled, and sick with hunger. Their eyes had been wide and desperate as she cut them. That was fine. She needed to eat, but not there. Not in that alley. That place was too close to others, and those others might take her kills, might take her food. She had to move her food to a safer place before eating, and she knew a good place. It was close to her sleeping place. Close, but not too close. If she let her scent back to her sleeping place, then it wouldn't be safe to sleep at anymore. The safe place was tucked away within the cracks of a rubble pile that the bigger humans couldn't reach her in. Their limbs were too thick, too big, and not strong enough. She could crawl into that place and eat there in the darkness. Her stomach clenched in pain, growling in demand. Her limbs were weak and sore. Her body was covered in bites and scratches. She ignored them all. She had to get to the safe eating place first. She pulled them along by their legs, careful to not move while other people might be watching, sticking to the sides and shadows where the others couldn't notice her before she had already moved on. If they noticed her, they would take her food. Then she would have to get other food. She might not be able to. She moved to pass through a crack in the side of the building before stopping. There was another there. She couldn't see it, couldn't hear it, couldn't smell it, couldn't feel it. It was there. She knew it was there. She had seen it. She didn't move, staying perfectly still in the pitch-black shadows of the corner she was about to emerge from. Her breath stilled, her limbs stopped, and her heart slowed. All that was left was her wide eyes in the darkest shadows of a planet of a dim star. The other was with two others, one female, two males. The two males were doing something to the female. The female did not want it. She was crying. She was trying to scream. She was muffled, and her limbs broken. They were laughing. Long minutes passed. Her stomach did not growl. She did not allow it to. It was not safe yet. She blinked. The sound of a blade dragging through meat. The ambient screams on the other side of the wall had quieted down. She waited until she heard the quiet footsteps move away from the other side. It was safe to move. She started forwards again, moving through the shadows along the corners and passing through the alley where there was once 3 others, but now only 1 corpse. She did not like how the corpse smelled. It stank of blood and sweat and dung and something else. She tried her best to ignore it, even as her mind was filled with images of everything that happened to it. They were bad things. She had seen them. She dragged her kills through the shadows, through the cracks in old walls and ruined structures. There were no plants in this section. Those only lived on the upper levels, where there wasn't anything to eat. She did not go there. She was careful in her return, moving slow and deliberately. She could not be seen by others, else bad things would happen to her. She did not want bad things to happen to her. She had reached her safe eating spot. She moved quickly, clambering up onto the rubble and down through the cracks. She had to force her kills through the hole and scrape her limbs on the loose rocks. It hurt her. Her stomach hurt. Everything hurt. But she was here, and she was in the safe eating space. The 3 dog corpses pressed up against her in this narrow crack in the rubble. They stank of corpse and were terribly thin. She did not bother with the knife and cutting them up to eat easier. She was too hungry. Her teeth tore into thin flesh and bit down into weak bones. She tugged at it for a moment, struggling to tear a bite-sized chunk free. Growling in frustration, she finally ripped off her first bite of her first meal in days and quickly chewed. It tasted horrible. It tasted like raw meat and fur. It tasted wonderful. It tasted like food and nourishment. Her work was methodical, teeth latching onto chunks of muscle and bone, and head thrashing until it pulled free from the rest of the body, then swallowing and moving on to the next section of corpse. First the limbs, then the torso, then the organs, and then whatever she could pull from the head. She needed to eat all of it while she could, in case another comes by and tries to take her kills, or take her. Eat fast and well, and then find something else to kill and keep. She needed to get bigger to stay alive, to stay safe. The first corpse went down her gullet quickly. She moved on to the second immediately after. She was almost full already, but she would eat until she couldn't anymore. If she fell asleep without being at least that full, the hunger would be almost too strong to move. It tasted awful. She did not want to eat it. It was food. She ate it. She had already done this. She had done this in her dreams last night. She knew about the rat, then the dogs, then the 3 others on her trip back, then her eating. She had seen it all before. She had done it all before. She traced the steps. They were safe steps. They were correct steps. She had to follow them. Otherwise, she might have bad things happen to her. She did not want bad things to happen to her. She did not want bad things to ever happen. She was almost at her fullest. All she had to do was finish eating the heart on the second kill. She brought up the red organ before stopping. She could smell something sweet. Something delicious. Something that she had never smelled before. She slowly pulled the heart down from her nose, raising her head slightly to sniff the air. Sweet and tasty. And tasty. She did not dream of this. Her heart began to race in fear. There were no sweet things here. Someone had brought something here. Footsteps at the entrance of the alleyway that led towards her crack. She stayed completely still in the darkness, eyes wide and gleaming. The footsteps were heavy, coming from something very heavy. They were deliberate, unafraid. Nothing was unafraid here. It was wrong. The footsteps stopped in the center of the alleyway. She had enough room to scamper up and out of the crack and away from the sweet, unafraid thing. She could escape. She stayed still. "Little one," a voice called out. It was strong and searching. It wanted to find her. It did not sound angry. It did not sound hungry. It was foreign. "I'm your brother. I've been looking for you." The voice continued. It was gentle. It was soft. I have food here if you want it. The sound of something being unwrapped, the sweet smell intensified. It was food. It was tasty. Her stomach was full, but she wanted to eat it. Her lips moistened and tongue wetted. She was afraid. This wasn't a thing she had seen. I swear I will not harm you. The voice wasn't lying. Slowly, making sure to not emerge too quickly, she poked her head from the pitch-black shadows of her crack. There was a giant in the center of the alley. He was sitting down. He was holding a loaf of strange-looking bread. None of her dreams had his face. She stared at him for a long time, waiting for the sights to come, waiting to see how was going to be hurt, how bad things were going to happen to him. Nothing came to her. He was sitting there, patiently waiting for her to emerge. He wasn't looking at her. He didn't know where she was. She couldn't see him. She could run. She was faster than the giant. The sweet smell filled her nose. She wanted to eat it. Slowly, she put one limb in front of the other, pulling herself along in the dark. She moved as slowly as possible, careful to make no noises. She moved as far as the end of the deepest shadows. Her heart pounded in her chest. She kept staring at the giant that she couldn't see. His chest was slowly rising and falling. He was breathing. He was calm. He was unafraid of this place. He was foreign. The bread smelled sweet. She couldn't see him being hurt. He was pretty. She crept forwards more, slowly moving into the less dark shadows and into the dusk light of the alley. She was in the shadow of the giant. Her eyes gleamed in the dark. As she stared at him, he slowly raised his gaze to stare at her. Her heart thundered. He smiled at her. It was a smile that wasn't hiding fear. It was a smile that wasn't hiding bad things. It was a good smile. She had never seen something like that before. He slowly moved, raising the bread and breaking off a chunk. He brought this chunk up to his mouth and ate it. She waited a long time for something to happen. He just kept a smile on his face. The bread wasn't poisoned. He brought up the loaf, offering it to her. Slowly, she moved forwards. Just as she got close enough, she snatched the loaf from his hand and moved back, waiting for him to do something. He didn't, simply leaning back and smiling. She stared at him, before slowly bringing the loaf up to her mouth and biting down. It was tasty. Tears welled up in her eyes. She couldn't stop them. She ate the loaf as quickly as she could, even as her stomach hurt from eating too much. She refused to throw up. It tasted too good. It tasted like food and sweet and happy. She forced it into her lips and stomach. You've been in a bad place for a while now, haven't you? The giant spoke. His voice was sad. She looked up to him. He was smiling. His eyes were sad. He reached out an open palm. Would you like to come home with me, little one? I have more than enough food for you. His face was gentle. His face was kind. She couldn't see him being hurt. Slowly, she reached out a hand and clutched it around his thumb. He was too big. His hand was warm. She was very cold. Her tatters too thin to keep out the ever-present chill of this place. She moved forwards, latching onto his clothes and body. He was warm. Her fingernails dug into his skin. Tears streamed down her face. She pressed her face into him, even as he shifted and stood up, an hand beneath her to keep her steady. The chill around her was going away. It couldn't reach her here. He was warm. She couldn't see him being hurt. He gave her food. He was a good place, a safe place. Her tears refused to stop. Petra stared at the thin scamp that brother had brought back from the planet they were flying over. Ooh! It was freshly washed and bandaged, wrapped up in eldar clothes and a large blanket. It was bundled up and tucked into the side of her brother, who was writing at the desk in the window room of the ship. Its face was buried in his side. It had long and coarse black hair, sickly pale skin, and gleaming purple-black eyes. It was better than how it looked when it came in a few hours ago, when it smelled of dead things and was covered in filth. This thing was supposed to be her sister. It was supposed to be her brother's sister, a thin little ugly thing, and smelled bad. Petra did not like this thing currently curled up into her brother like an undignified animal. Its weakest point was its neck. She could hurt it bad. Brother wouldn't like that. Petra grunted and looked down at the space map again. It was very big, almost too big to think about. Olympia was right there, and it would take many days for her to walk all the way around it. It was just a tiny speck on the big map, and they were currently very far away from it. She wanted to know how. She told them to teach her about the webway her brother mentioned. They told her she needed to understand other things before it would make sense to her, she insisted. They started explaining. She didn't understand. She almost tore up her pretty feathers over it. It made her mad. She wanted to know right now, but she couldn't. She had to learn other things first. She told brother about it. He just smiled and told her that she was learning much faster than he did. She didn't believe him, but he insisted, so she would allow him to lie. He had special powers that let him plan things. It was a boring power, but it was good at getting chores done. Chores like getting the new sister. Petra had been excited at first. That excitement turned into disappointment as she saw what he carried back. It was this thing, currently tucked into his side. It didn't even know how to talk right yet. It talked in some language that wasn't High Gothic or the pretty talk. Is something wrong, Petra? Her brother asked, blinking at her and pausing to sip at the honey drink. She had asked the servants for a taste. They told her that she had to ask her brother. Her brother told her that she had to grow up more. It was frustrating. She's boring and ugly and was stinky, she explained, listing off the flaws that were present in the creature at her brother's side. She looked at brother. His weakest point was one of his hearts and neck. He had 2 weak points. That meant she needed to be extra careful around him. Petra, he said sternly. His gaze turned towards her as if she had said something wrong. She scowled and turned her gaze to the floor. She wasn't wrong. The weakest point in the floor was at the places where the rivets attached the storage panels to its underlying structure. Petra, I would like for you to get along with your sister. I am. She reasonably argued. Saying mean things isn't getting along with her. How would you like it if someone called you boring or ugly? But I'm not. But would you like it? She shifted in her chair, tucking her chin into her knees. No, she muttered. She didn't want to look at his face right now. It was going to be disappointed in her. She didn't want to see that. Your sister has a special power too. She wanted to know what it was. What? She demanded. She can see things before they happen, but she was in a very bad place. Petra's face scrunched together as she thought about that. If she could see things before they happen, but was in a bad place, that meant that she could see bad things. Petra could see bad things too. Bad things like the demon eye. Oh, Petra, can you promise me that you'll try to be kind to your sister? Try to help her? Try to be patient with her? Her brother asked. She glanced up to see his eyes staring at her. She quickly looked away again. She didn't want to see those looking at her like that. Be kind. Try to help. Try to be patient. She scowled. She was doing that. She was pointing out her bad places so the sister could get rid of them. Her brother would be upset with her if she said that, so instead she muttered out something else. Okay. She glanced over. Brother was smiling at her. That was a good thing. She basked in it for a moment. Her sister shifted slightly in her sleep. Petra turned her gaze to consider her again. She frowned. Her sister needed pretty feather ears, but not from the biggest lizard. That belonged to her. Her sister could have feathers from a next biggest lizard. Those were smaller and less impressive, which was matching. Then she would teach sister how to talk properly. That was also required to make her better. Then some more things. She wasn't sure yet. She turned her gaze back to the map and stared at all the dots. The weakest point in the table was the intersection of the legs and the flat board on top. Each one was a planet, suspended by gravity in a void. The void was not actually empty. filled with absolutely minuscule amounts of atmosphere spread throughout. She knew all these things immediately. She wanted to know more. She turned her gaze to the drink on her brother's side. She turned her gaze up to glare at him. "I'm old enough now." "No, you aren't." He immediately refused. She grumbled and stared longingly at the mystery drink. She wanted to know how it tasted. The weakest point in the glass was the handle. It probably tasted good.